Story 1. He punched a disabled student, and the entire hallway of students jumped in unison. It was the only time I saw everyone agree on one thing in school. Story 2. He picked on a smaller kid near the locker room. The smaller kid hit him across the head with his combination lock, causing a lot of blood and crying. Oddly enough, he tried to bully the smaller kid a second time in shop class. This time, the kid used a piece of wood to strike the bully's shins. After that, he left the kid alone. He wasn't very successful at bullying, though it wasn't for lack of trying. Story 3. He picked a fight with a smaller kid who was built like a fireplug and on the wrestling team. It did not end well for him. It happened right in front of my lunch table by the tray drop-off. The guy actually stabbed the wrestler in the head with a fork, which bent and only made him angrier. The wrestler lifted the guy and slammed him down, then did it again. He hit that boy with a punch. Twice. Story 4. This particular bully once pushed me across the school bus seat hard enough that I cracked a window because I had the nerve to sit in the aisle seat he wanted. Somehow, it was both of our faults since I refused to move when he demanded it, and our parents had to split the repair cost. Over 10 years after high school, I have a successful career and have just bought my first home in a very walkable part of town. The nearest liquor store is a bit of a dump, but hey, it's well stocked. I go there to buy some beer, and guess who is working the checkout counter? Yep, him. Given how long ago this was, I'm polite and pleasant to him, especially when he asks me how I've been. I say, doing great. I graduated from college, my job is great, and I just bought a new house a few blocks down the road. How are you doing? I don't remember his response, but I know he avoided eye contact afterward. Story 5. We both applied to the same college. I was accepted, but she was not. I made sure she knew I was declining that school to attend a different one. Story 6. Mine died of pancreatic cancer. He was also incarcerated for a time for kidnapping a minor. Story 7. One of my friends died in prison. Others are elderly, overweight, and worn out from working too hard for too little pay. Story 8. I had a child who would follow me home, pushing me every few steps. I was timid, so he thought he could get away with it. On the second day of this, I waited until we were alone. When he went in for a push, I grabbed him and did what my fifth-grade mind imagined a headlock to be. I then walked him around like that for a couple of minutes, pushed him over, and spat on him. He avoided me after that. Story 9. He moved to Sweden, got married, and had a child. The marriage deteriorated, so he asked to meet his wife at the top of a parking garage while their child was at soccer practice in a field below. He then stabbed her over 30 times to death and is spending the rest of his life in prison. Story 10. In the early 1990s, a high school student who was perceived as effeminate was frequently bullied. During his senior year in a science class, he reached his breaking point with one of his biggest tormentors, leading to a physical altercation. The teacher intervened after the bully's face was slammed against one of the stone lab tables. It's unclear what happened to the bully, but years later, we saw the other student in the audience of a talk show, apparently out and proud, living a fulfilling life. Story 11. I confronted her during a school counseling session after multiple bullying interventions, but there was still no progress. The day before, she mocked a sweet little girl I defended, which led to a confrontation between us. The next day, she hit me hard for no apparent reason. However, I had experience from fighting my cousins, and she ended up defeated and didn't attend school for a week. Story 12. In 8th grade, he entered the boys' restroom with his group. They began mocking a short boy who was combing his hair in the mirror. The boy turned and punched him in the face. He and his group left without saying a word. News spread among the 8th graders rapidly. Story 13. Not a huge bully, but not a huge karma either. I was in orchestra in high school, and we had this one really mean girl. She thought she was better than everyone else. She would mock us and laugh as her boyfriend knocked over our music stands while we were trying to practice. She told everyone she was going to be a world-famous violinist. In junior year, she was second chair because our first chair was a senior who was so good she was hired to play at private events. When the senior graduated, little Miss All That thought she'd get first chair. Nope, we had an absolute prodigy transfer in from the local music magnet school. She played 6 instruments, composed, and was told she could only keep one, so she kept the violin. Hence, she remained second chair. No matter, she's still brilliant and bragged to everyone that she was going to audition for Juilliard and go there. A local state college actually has a well-known music program, but that was for amateurs. She was going to New York City. I ran into her 5 years later, working retail at a local craft store. She was largely pregnant with her 3rd child. Her high school boyfriend got her pregnant just after graduation, and she didn't get to go to college at all. Plus, poor thing was stuck actually living with him, and given how abusive he was to anyone around him, that couldn't have been fun. I asked if she still played for fun, but she said she hadn't touched an instrument in years. I actually felt sorry for her, more now than I did at the time, but even then I realized she had messed up her life with that guy. She truly was a good violinist. Probably not Juilliard, but definitely suited for a local music college and a major city orchestra level with practice. Story 14. I had 2 main friends, Jameson and Arturo. Jameson dropped out of high school and ended up couch surfing until his friends had enough of him. He was arrested and sentenced to 2 years in prison for threatening his ex and attempting to break into her house. I happened to be in court for a traffic violation when he had his first hearing on the trespassing charge. Arturo had a successful football career in high school, was involved with several girls, and ended up getting 5 of them pregnant. After high school, he disappeared, and I assumed he left to avoid child support. Story 15. Died from alcohol poisoning less than a year after graduation. His friends left him deceased on a park bench. Story 16. He would always pick on a heavyset girl, and one day she snapped. She gave him a few good gut punches and a swift kick. She was in the process of trying to stuff him into a locker when a teacher came and intervened. He never lived it down. Story 17. A new student thought he was impressive and bullied others. He picked on the wrong person and they fought. He ended up with a broken jaw and had to change schools again. Story 18. He continued to bother a classmate of mine who is about my height and weight. One day, the classmate had enough and picked him up, body slamming him to the ground. Turns out he is actually a black belt and has also trained in boxing. Meanwhile, the bully is just one of those typical football players. Story 19. The guy was just a big lumbering oaf who I had gotten along with okay until our final test in college. The lecturer left the room briefly, and this guy stood up, looked at my answers and said, "Oh right, I didn't know that one," and copied my answer. I, being foolish, leaned across and scribbled on his page. He stood up and hit me so hard that I had a concussion on both sides of my skull. One side from his punch and the other side from where my head hit the table. I finished my test and excused myself to pass out unconscious in a hallway hiding under some stairs. I think my fight or flight response kicked in a little late. The guy was banned from the college for life, faced criminal charges for assault, and lost his job as we were all apprentices for different engineering companies doing our first year together. This is where I feel bad. While having x-rays for the concussion, a radiologic technologist noticed a dark mass, and it turns out I had a significant tumor on my pituitary gland. He kind of saved my life. I've always said if I win the lottery, I will help him out for saving my life. Story 20. She spent all of junior year spreading rumors that I was poor because I always brought lunch from home. I later found out she was rejected from her dream college because she spent too much time bullying people instead of studying. Meanwhile, my packed lunches helped my parents save enough for my full college tuition. Story 21. This was by no means the school bully, but he was a bully to me, being 6 inches taller than I was. He had an annoying habit of walking just behind me and stepping on my shoe, causing my foot to come out of it. This happened way too often. One day, for the very last time, he did it again. Something came over me and I spun around, striking his nose with the full momentum of my pent-up rage. I had recently learned that hitting with a fist can damage one's own fingers compared to using the palm of the hand, but I didn't realize until that moment that I had internalized that fact. What a beautiful strike that was. I'm sure I broke his nose, but my vision was too blurred by my own stunning achievement. He never troubled me again. In fact, I don't remember his presence at all after that. Unfortunately, stories of this encounter spread around the school, and I sadly acquired the reputation of a martial artist, as martial arts films had just become popular. This attracted the unwanted attention of bigger boys in higher classes who wanted to test my skills. Nothing came of it, and I was very happy that phase ended without further issues. Story 22. In college, we had a mutual female friend whose boyfriend was verbally and physically abusive, unbeknownst to us at the time. One night, we were at a house party where he had some drinks and started raising his voice aggressively at her, trying to drag her out of the party. He calmed down, but it happened again and he slapped her. He was thrown out of the party and tried to break down the front door to get back in. He was met with fists from a dozen or so partygoers as the scuffle spilled onto the sidewalk. Another party was happening down the block, and there were people on the porch who asked why he was being assaulted. We told them he hit his girlfriend, and another dozen or so angry guys joined in. Sirens in the distance caused the crowd to scatter back to the parties. He crawled into his vehicle to leave as the police arrived, and he was promptly arrested for driving under the influence. The police made very little effort to investigate why this man was attacked. Story 23. We had this 7th grader named Chard, who looked like a pint-sized Scott Baio and liked to shove around and threaten to beat up kids smaller than him. He was the kind of kid who wore those idiotic wrist sweatbands like they were leather cuffs of a cage fighter. Anyway, 8th grade starts, and Chard is still pushing smaller and weaker kids around. But now, there's a new kid at our school. This pale, overweight red-headed kid. I think his name was Alex. Chard sees this kid and must have salivated. Fat and a pale redhead? This kid must have seemed like a victim custom-made for Chard's attention. So, Chard starts pushing Alex around, and I think Alex, who had probably had his fill of getting bullied, and probably weighed twice as much as Chard, not only fought back but unleashed on Chard using his greater weight and his rage against him. He beat Chard to a pulp before Mr. Bronger was able to stop the one-sided beating. Little Chard, in his little elastic wrist sweatbands, didn't seem to push people around after that. It was glorious. Story 24. A student at my school was involved in a drunk driving accident during his sophomore year, resulting in mental disabilities. He had a history of making racist comments and often attempted to cheat off me, but I kept my distance. His sister was also difficult to interact with, and people often made jokes about him to deter her. Story 25. One day it reached a tipping point, and I hit him in the face so hard that he fell to the ground crying like a baby in front of the whole class. I didn't even realize what I had done. It just happened on autopilot because I was so stressed and on edge from months of consistent bullying. I was never bullied again after that day, and the bully also stopped targeting others. I then wondered why it took me so long to understand that some people only respond to one type of message. Story 26. A typical loudmouth picked a fight with a foreign student who was new to the high school. It turned out the student was an orphan street kid from Central America and could fight like nothing we had ever seen. Needless to say, nobody ever bothered him again. Story 27. My bully tormented me for years. He made my life hell. He was popular, an athlete, prom king, and very muscular, which made it worse. But even though he was all those things, I could tell no one really liked or trusted him. He was narcissistic. I think people pretended to like him out of fear. Anyway, about 5 years after high school, I am back in my hometown visiting friends. We went out for drinks and then started walking to a friend's house to hang out some more. It's about midnight on a residential street. We hear a strange bang down the street but don't see anything. As we walk closer, we see a large shape in the middle of the road. We wondered, what is that? A UFO. As we get closer, a car that drove by pulls over, and the driver gets out to inspect it. Then, from about 30 yards away, we figure out what it is. A truck, possibly a lifted Tacoma, completely flipped upside down on its roof. My friends, the driver who pulled over, and I inspect the truck. It was a strange sight. Aside from being completely upside down, it was in perfect condition. The lights were on, and the driver's side door was open. We were confused. As we inspected further, my friend exclaimed, "Look, it's a wallet. It must have fallen as the guy ran away." We gathered around my friend as she opened the wallet. Inside, we found the driver's license. It's my bully from high school. We all knew him, so we immediately started sharing stories about how unpleasant he was, and we were eager to call the police. But this was an era before everyone had cell phones. One of my friends did have one, and her father was a police officer, so she called him, and he sent squad cars to the truck and to the bully's house. It turns out he had several driving under the influence charges and a record for drugs and bar fights. He was incarcerated for a while. Over the years, I've heard that he has been in and out of jail and has been dealing with issues related to steroid use and alcoholism. We are now in our 40s, and last I heard, he still lives at home. Nothing warms my heart more than knowing that he has had a miserable life. Story 28. This may seem dark. The kid who bullied me relentlessly picked on me until I lost my cool and got in trouble, but he was never punished. I hated him passionately. In early adulthood, he was stricken by grand mal seizures and now lives in a wheelchair. I guess we could argue that he didn't deserve it, but you could never convince 10-year-old me. Story 29. He loved flaunting his wealth with designer clothes and, later in high school, a brand new Mustang. Bumping into him a few years later revealed that his parents wasted almost all their money on Scientology. Story 30. One of my bullies grew up to have a daughter who is a high-achieving child, just like I was when she bullied me. She has to send her daughter to school every day, knowing exactly how she is likely to be treated by her peers, and there is nothing she can do about it. Story 31. He grew up and apologized to everyone during his junior year. That same year, another significant bully passed away from cancer. Anyone else who was a bully was expelled at some point since it was a private school. Senior year was free of bullying. Story 32. He works for a used car salesman selling defective vehicles to unsuspecting elderly women. He lives in a dilapidated recreational vehicle with 3 unpleasant children and an overweight, unattractive wife who bosses him around. He lost his hair by age 30, has a belly that rivals Santa, and looks about 20 years older than the rest of us. Story 33. My first and only fight was instigated by me. I shoved him at lunch when he was making fun of kids using sign language. I told him to meet me down the street after school. He made fake gang signs and mimicked the voice of a deaf kid who had friends that could hear and were learning sign language. I snapped. He showed up to the fight with a baseball batting glove on one hand. I commented on his Michael Jackson glove, then punched him in the nose as hard as I could. It wasn't much of a fight. I punched him and he started bleeding. He turned his back to the fight while holding his nose, and I taunted him. He never said anything to those kids again, and I never got suspended. Interestingly, he was taller than me but not much heavier in high school. Now, he's about 6 feet 5 inches and 280 pounds and would absolutely overpower me. He's a normal guy now with a wife and kids and is no longer insufferable. Story 34. There was a video that circulated about 10 years ago of a bullied kid lifting up the bully and slamming him into the ground. The bullied kid's name was Casey Haynes, and the bully was Richard Gale. I am sure the video still exists. Story 35. One of my friends was forced into therapy after a fight as a teenager with the police. After some time, he realized the reasons behind his bullying behavior and overcame it. He went on to become a counselor for at-risk teenagers. Story 36. There was a kid who bullied everyone at our bus stop in middle school. He would start with insults, but if you ignored those, he would get physical, pulling on clothes to stop you or shoving you unexpectedly. His friends would circle around so you couldn't get away. I was bigger than him. I was a quiet guy and played the viola in our middle school orchestra. Although I was naturally built, I tended to get asked to play football, as the other kids couldn't stop my movement when they tried to tackle me. So while no one expected me to get physical, they also didn't mess with me directly. One day, he and his friends shoved my friend to the ground and started shaking him up and taking swings at him. I grabbed my viola in its fabric-covered hard case and swung it hard. It hit him and knocked him off my buddy. He ran home crying to his parents. They showed up at my house, and I explained what happened to my parents. They, in turn, told his parents that he shouldn't start trouble and that if they had raised their child better, this wouldn't have happened. Story 37. There was a group of individuals who initially acted like friends, but then belittled me and made fun of my interests without restraint. One day, it became physical when a basketball was thrown at my face for no reason, and the school took no action. 2 are deceased from an overdose, and 1 is struggling with addiction. I feel guilty for laughing about it, but their behavior continued even after we all became legal adults. Karma can be unforgiving. Story 38. I was bullied like everyone else in my class by a certain kid. I discussed this with my father, who warned me that his family situation was difficult. I tried to help him in class. Over time, he calmed down a bit. We didn't become friends, but his behavior improved. After school, I never saw him again. He passed away 2 years ago at 44 due to heart failure after a life struggling with drug addiction, primarily cocaine. I felt a deep sense of sorrow for him. Story 39. When he picked on the young kid on the bus, I had enough of it. I walked up the aisle, pushed his face away, and dropped him with one punch. Problem solved. 20 years later, I see him stocking shelves at a local grocery store. He sees me and immediately apologizes for how he treated people in high school. Story 40. A group of wild turkeys chased him across the parking lot after he tried to scare them. He was not a very good runner, and they managed to peck him a few times. Story 41. She was impaired while driving, going 78 miles per hour in a 45 mile per hour zone on the wrong side of the road, and crashed into another car, resulting in the death of an elderly woman inside. She received a sentence of 15 years but only served 90 to 120 days in prison, along with a fine of $1,000 and 200 hours of community service. This is a mockery of justice. She deserved to be imprisoned for the full 15 years. Story 42. It was class picture day in 8th grade, which meant that every 8th grader in the school was in the gym at the same time. Everyone was up on the bleachers except for me and the bully who had tormented me for 5 to 6 years, Pat Carney. I use his name because he deserves no courtesy. For some background, by the time I was in 8th grade, I was already 6 feet 2 inches tall. I was very skinny, but I was tall. I had been bullied my entire life, and this day was going to be like every other. As expected, he approached me and began making fun of my somewhat unusual first name. For once, I actually responded. I turned around and called him an offensive name. He reacted by using the classic bully tactic of asking, "What did you say to me?" before he swung at me. I snapped. I started punching as hard and as fast as I could. I really thought this kid was going to seriously hurt me, so I figured I might as well go down swinging. It took 2 gym teachers to pull me off him. He was suspended for 3 days for starting the fight, while I received a half-day suspension for participating. The vice principal told my mother that she knew this kid had been bullying me for years and mentioned that I had gotten a few good punches in. After that day, I was called Rocky until the end of the year. I'm not proud of that moment, especially since he was still able to stand after I was done. 47 years later, I still despise him. Story 43. She made fun of me for being overweight. I left our hometown, earned a degree, traveled the world, fell in love with a wonderful man, and got fit. She is still there, has 4 children with different fathers, is divorced multiple times, and is now overweight. Take that, Kelly. Story 44. A student in his 14th round of 11th grade shoved me, and I kicked him in the side of the knee. It turned out he had just had surgery on that knee. He went down wailing and needed more surgery. The last time I saw him, he still walked with a limp. I take pride in that incident. He faced the consequences. It's not my fault he didn't think anyone would retaliate. I would have done exactly the same, even if I had known about the surgery. Story 45. One person who used to bully me and almost everyone else continued his behavior after high school. He joined the military but was discharged due to his violent actions. He and some of his fellow soldiers would terrorize local bars whenever they had free time. They would get drunk, use cocaine, start fights, stalk barmaids after closing time, and vandalize cars. After being discharged, he turned to harder and cheaper drugs. He is now a shell of his former self. He has lost all his muscle mass and approaches every social interaction as if his life is in danger because he can't remember whom he wronged in the past. I know this because he came to my house to collect various bits of scrap metal I was throwing away. I instantly recognized him. I knew he recognized me too. He and his friends had beaten me up in a bar years ago, but he couldn't exactly recall where or when. That's right. He's the local drugged-up junker. Story 46. A kid transferred to my high school during my sophomore year from a school in a bigger city and thought he was tough because he claimed to be in a gang. He was a middle-class white kid, weighing about 150 pounds soaking wet. He engaged in typical bully behavior, stealing money, harassing theater kids and nerds, making teachers' lives miserable, and more. I honestly don't know why nobody put him in his place. He was a menace. One day, he turned his attention to a set of twins who were developmentally challenged. These two kids were loved by everyone in my high school, especially the football team. The twins were unofficially part of the team and assisted at practices by filling water bottles and setting up cones. This little bully thought it would be funny to convince them that their mom had an inappropriate relationship with an athlete they admired. Unfortunately for him, the entire conversation was overheard by a couple of varsity offensive linemen. Later that day, about 6 football players captured him and duct-taped him to one of the support beams in the student center with his pants around his ankles. The strange part was that all the teachers, janitors, security guards, and other students who walked by seemed oblivious to his screaming. He was left there for a good hour before the vice principal got him down, but not before he embarrassed himself. I think he lasted about 2 weeks before transferring to an alternative school. Good riddance. Story 47. The revenge was him taking my snacks, so I went on vacation to Poland during the summer holiday. I brought back a 6-pack of extremely spicy crisps that likely aren't legal in the UK. I ate 5 packs and collected the dust from them, as these crisps have an unusual amount of dust in the corners compared to other types. I put the dust into the last pack and resealed it. He stole it and ate the whole thing. He turned red, and snot came out of his nose. On the way to the toilets, he had his handheld gaming device, and it somehow ejected the game. I took it while he was dripping snot on the ground. Thankfully, the game survived. Story 48. Remember the ice bucket challenge? It involved people dumping ice water on each other for charity about 10 years ago. A group of bullies at my school tricked an autistic student into doing the challenge, but instead of water, they filled the bucket with spit, feces, urine, and tobacco and poured it onto him. I recall it being a huge deal locally at the time. The perpetrators were eventually identified and caught. As for punishment, I'm not sure about all of them, but at least the oldest one, who was 18 and possibly liable for serious punishment, took a plea deal to avoid jail time and received only probation. A condition of the probation was that he would have to experience a similar treatment to what he subjected the autistic student to, except it happened on a dairy farm. Yes, such unusual punishments do occur, and there are numerous examples of them. I researched and found that defendants in such cases could easily get such sentences overturned if they appealed, but then they would serve a standard jail sentence, which they want to avoid. There are also not many limits on what judges can impose as probation conditions. When I heard about it, I thought he was getting off too easily. No prison time and a punishment that would last only a couple of minutes at most. Then someone got a video of his punishment, which circulated around the school for a while. They used a manure tanker, and that stuff poured onto him for about 45 seconds. He was gagging and vomiting. Quite satisfying and fitting, I suppose. Thankfully, the video's been taken down since then. I wouldn't want that to haunt him for the rest of his life. He learned his lesson, I'm sure. Story 49. This probably won't go to the extent that is intended for this kind of question, but I photographed for a professional baseball team. One day, while I was on the field taking some pictures, I heard someone shout my name. I looked behind the net and saw a guy who bullied me in high school waving at me. I was friendly, but in my head, I thought, yeah, stay behind the net. I'm on the field, and you're not. Story 50. When they kept picking on someone much bigger until that person snapped and beat him badly, causing him to black out. I heard about it and saw a photo of his face. This was a few years after high school, so he hadn't changed at all. He wasn't tough, physically strong, or intimidating. He exclusively bullied quiet kids who wouldn't stand up to him until that day. Story 51. I had a bully in elementary school. He was bigger than me, so I couldn't fight him. One morning in my early 20s, I went to take my car to the dealer to get it washed. I handed the attendant my keys without noticing that it was my bully. This could have been a moment for me to seek revenge, but I smiled and chatted with him for a bit. He was working on an apprenticeship to become a mechanic at the car dealer. The best revenge is living well, but it's even better when you meet adversaries with humility and kindness. Story 52, he went on to join the Islamic State, made a big statement about burning his Canadian passport, and was then killed by a United States military airstrike. I still have strong feelings about how Canada's own forms of racism push immigrant and refugee boys down that particular pipeline. But my shoulders relaxed slightly when I saw the news article declaring him dead. Story 53. In 8th grade, this girl used to pull my hair and steal my lunch money. One day, she tried to push me down the stairs, but karma hit instantly. She slipped on her own shoes and tumbled down instead. She broke her arm and had to wear a cast for months. Story 54. One of the students at my high school was known for teasing band members and interfering with their instruments for fun. He got drunk, drove his car through a concrete barrier, and died in a canal. Almost no one cared or attended his memorial service. His parents were upset with the school because of the low turnout and pulled their younger daughter out, as she was one of his biggest targets. Story 55. When the bully threw my jacket into the pond, my older brother, who played football, found him and threw him into the pond. His children are receiving my inheritance. Story 56. I grew up in the early 1990s, and when our county banned paddling as punishment during my junior year of high school, our school switched to billy ragging as discipline. Basically, there is a rag that has been thoroughly wiped all over a male goat in rut and then sealed in a jar. Goat farmers sell them, ostensibly for goat breeding purposes, but that is not why 90% of the buyers are purchasing them. The punishment involved being taken out back, having the lid popped from the jar, and putting your nose in it for 2 to 5 minutes. It smells. Thankfully, I never experienced it, but on the rare occasion someone did, you could faintly smell it on and around them for the rest of the day, and sometimes the next. Some parents and students complained, but personally, I appreciated that they used this method. Bullying and disruptive behavior decreased significantly afterward. It surprised me that bullies feared the rag more than the paddle. One student did bully my friends a bit at the beginning of the year, but he improved quickly after his trip to the vice principal. Story 57. He insulted a student's girlfriend and was confronted in the school bathroom. He was physically assaulted and locked himself in a stall. When he returned to class, he was upset and argued with the substitute teacher about leaving, but the teacher prevailed, and he spent the rest of the class sulking. The next day, as soon as he entered the classroom, everyone pointed and laughed. To make it worse, the prettiest girl in class was the first and loudest to do so. He left the room and I never saw him again. Story 58. I grew up in an awful neighborhood. One girl was the real ringleader of the girls who bullied me. She beat me severely. Once, she came outside with a TV tray with the legs attached and hit me over the head until it broke. She was easily twice my size, and I never fought her off. Kids grow up, we moved, I went off to college, and honestly, I kind of forgot about her. But one day she was in the news. She had died in her apartment from a gastrointestinal bleed, and her landlord found her several weeks later. She also had a baby in the apartment that did not survive the time alone. I will never stop thinking about that baby's last days and hours. I will never stop wondering why no one, except the landlord, ever went looking for her when she went missing and when her baby went missing. I don't know what was wrong with her that made her a bully, but I know she didn't resolve it. Her short life was probably filled with as much or more pain than she ever inflicted on anyone else. But I don't hate her anymore, and I grieved for her child. Story 59. A group of 3 brothers constantly bullied others at our high school, always looking for fights without reason. One day after school in the neighborhood, they targeted the wrong person. A senior at my school, a large Latino guy, was walking down the street when the 3 brothers jumped him. He proceeded to defeat all 3 of them simultaneously. Their alcoholic father heard the commotion and came outside to intervene, but he also ended up getting beaten. Other students from our school witnessed the incident, so when we arrived at school the next day, everyone had heard the news. It is hard to maintain a tough image when one teenager can overpower all three brothers and their father. Story 60. There was a kid in fourth grade named Jacob who was different. He liked reading fantasy books instead of watching sports, wore bright colors, and talked with his hands. The school bully tormented him daily, calling him names and making sure everyone knew he was a loser. It got so bad that Jacob started skipping school. Eventually, Jacob's dad demanded a parent-teacher conference with everyone involved. I will never forget his dad's face. Not angry, just deeply sad. "My son cries himself to sleep," he said quietly. "He's asked to change schools. He spends recess hiding in bathroom stalls. He thinks something is wrong with him for being who he is." The guidance counselor asked the bully why this was happening, and he just shrugged. He received attention and went home quietly. The reason I know all this happened is that I was that bully. During that meeting, I realized how much I was hurting Jacob and how I was the villain because I was so insecure. I figured out that if I pointed attention at someone weirder than me, I would be safe and no one would make fun of me. Jacob was just collateral damage in my plan not to be a target. I apologized to Jacob the next day and actually got to know him over the next few weeks. By middle school, I became someone who stood up for kids who were different because I finally understood the damage I had caused. Sometimes the bully just needs to see the real pain they are creating. Story 61. Mine ended up with a restraining order against me while in high school. His mother was pleading not to have to send him back to juvenile detention. She seemed to have good intentions, but as a single mother, she had a challenging situation with her son. Story 62. I was in a pub in Canberra and started chatting with a man. He told me he is from the same town as I am. In the conversation, he mentioned the name of the most disliked kid from primary school who was found dead, beaten to death. I shed no tears. In fact, I still have a laugh to myself. Couldn't happen to a nicer person. Story 63. He wasn't a school bully, but he bullied me. He always bragged about being accepted to the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, inventing new things, and thought he was better than everyone else. He insulted me and my friends, sometimes punched me, and boasted about how much money and women he would have. The last I heard, he is still living with his parents at 26, is single, works in IT support, and graduated from a local college. It's important to note that living with your parents, having that job, and being single are not bad, but it contrasts sharply with the life he claimed he would have and made others feel bad for not striving toward. He did lose a lot of weight, so good for him. Story 64. I don't know how much of a bully he was, but he was aggressive and got into fights frequently. He also sold low-quality drugs. However, I think things changed when he was involved in an incident with a police officer and died. Story 65. When she was arrested and imprisoned for 31 months due to racial hatred, she remained a horrible person. At 9 years old, she exhibited negative behavior, and at 41, she has not changed. Story 66. In 6th grade, there was a boy I absolutely disliked who would always make comments about me because I was a tall, nerdy girl who would verbally fight back. He never did anything too extreme. He was just mean and would pretend to hit me to make me flinch, but I never did, which I think only made him hate me more. He kept getting held back for behavioral issues, which I didn't even know was possible. The 6th graders still walked from class to class in lines like little kids, and one day I saw him in line and suddenly started laughing. He lost his temper. I expected to get in trouble because I definitely started it, but I think the teacher knew he had tormented me the previous year. He ended up either dropping out or getting expelled from middle school at 17 and never made it to high school. I heard he stabbed another student with a fork, which led the entire district to switch to plastic utensils. I have no idea where he is now. Story 67. I remember when I used to get bullied by a group of guys. I just took it until one day I lost my temper and hit one of them back. He stumbled, tripped over his friend, and because he was heavier, he rolled down the hill into the mud. His parents couldn't help him up, so he had to sit in it for the rest of the day. He never bothered me again. Story 68. I had a girl in high school who constantly mocked my accent. During our graduation ceremony, she went up to give her valedictorian speech and completely froze. Guess who helped her through her panic attack backstage? That's right, the girl with the funny accent. Story 69. She went for National Cadet Corps camping. There were students from about 15 other schools. Apparently, they bullied her terribly, and she cried. Karma has a way of coming back around. Story 70. During my first year of teaching, a student who resembled a less psychotic version of Cartman had been tormenting a nice, polite, quiet girl for months. About a week before the end of the year, she snapped and punched him in the nose. She hit him perfectly, and blood poured out. She immediately went to the head teacher, admitted what she did, and accepted that she had to face consequences. Ultimately, she received a couple of extra days off, but no substantial punishment. Story 71. When I broke his nose, he had picked on me for a full year before I lost my temper. I guess the idea of someone smaller than him hitting back never occurred to him. Story 72. One of my friends died after consuming an entire bottle of vodka. I must say, it couldn't have happened to a nicer person. Story 73. He broke his hand on the brick wall behind me when I moved out of the way. That was in middle school. He left me alone after that. I've seen him around as an adult, and he seems like a decent person these days. Story 74. He was really small but walked around with two big friends. On the last day of 6th grade, his friends threw me in a trash can, and I was very embarrassed. However, I grew that summer by about 5 or 6 inches, and when I returned the next year, I was one of the tallest kids in school. I went right up to that bully, picked him up, and threw him into a trash can. Felt good. Story 75. He wasn't a school bully, but he argued and made a fool of himself until the teacher cried, and then he laughed at that. One day, he came in with his head in his sleeve, slumped over his desk, quietly sobbing. I confronted him, taunting and provoking him until he ran out of the class. I'm sure he was genuinely going through something, but I didn't care. He was so disrespectful to our math teacher, and she was incredibly kind. Story 76. It took a few years longer than we all expected, but he was arrested and finally locked up when he was about 26. He was held back 3 times as a child, so he was 3 years older than all of us at graduation. He often acted unpleasantly for no reason other than being aggressive and physically strong. According to a friend of a friend who worked as a correctional officer at the prison, he got into a fight with someone, was stabbed multiple times, and then bled out. This occurred around 2010 or 2011, and the small town I was from published his obituary in their newspaper, but it did not mention a funeral service. Story 77. I had a bully in 4th grade. He would hit me, tease me, and get others to join in. He even tried to take my lunch money. Years later, I became a teacher, and my principal was the administrator at the school where I was student teaching. He remembered me and recalled what I had gone through. Since it was years later, he shared a part of the story he couldn't tell me or my family. The bully's parents were using him as a bargaining chip in their divorce. I suppose the bully was facing his consequences while he was bullying me. Most bullies are passing their pain onto someone else for relief. I can't imagine a 9-year-old having the maturity to realize and compartmentalize their pain. This is where I learned that forgiveness isn't for other people. It's for yourself. Story 78. He dated my former partner. She deliberately tried to hit him with her car. Then he got someone pregnant whom no one would want to be involved with, and he is now an average person who tried to contact me on a dating app, not realizing it was me. Story 79. Sent is sitting down a flight of concrete steps. I never saw him again, and oddly enough, I was never bullied again. Story 80. I tell this story often, but I was never a big kid, standing at 5 feet 9 inches and weighing 152 pounds in high school. I joined the wrestling team and became deceptively strong, fast, and gained many skills through wrestling. In my junior year, a bully named Jeremiah transferred from another school. He immediately began picking on kids smaller than him, and he was about 6 feet 2 inches tall and weighed 200 pounds. At the time, it was outside the wrestling season, and we didn't have a wrestling room. We had to roll out a mat in the boys' locker room to practice. Jeremiah was on the football team and started making fun of one of the younger wrestlers he had been bullying. I called him out and challenged him to a match, saying, "What, you think you're so tough that you can take me?" Bring your energy to the mat and back up that talk. He couldn't back down because other football players were there egging him on. He came to the mat with a smirk, talking trash. We started the match, and since he wasn't a wrestler, I easily tricked him by pretending to go after his head and then went low, got him in a double leg, and picked him up on my shoulder, taking him completely off the ground. I held him for a couple of seconds while he struggled, then reared back and slammed him as hard as I could on his back. The football players went wild, making fun of him. I got up and looked down. His nose was bleeding. I helped him back up, took him to the sinks nearby, and got him cleaned up. All he said was, "Damn, dude, you slammed me hard." I replied, "Do me a favor, just don't mess with my wrestlers anymore. And as a matter of fact, look out for them when I'm not around." He just said, "You got it, man. Don't want to get slammed again." After that, we actually became friends, and he started calling me Grande Huevos every time he saw me. He was no longer the school bully. Story 81. He was once a promising baseball star before college and a prominent bully. He already had a scout looking at him for a first base reliever position on a Double-A team. However, he suffered a drug overdose, flipped his car, and died in the crash. No one mourned him. Story 82. They weren't bullies per se, but my friend group had two brothers and their unpleasant friend who liked to mess with us. We went back and forth for a few years, sometimes getting into fights and even shooting each other with paintball guns. The older brother eventually went to prison for breaking and entering, theft, and other charges. When he got out, he sent me a friend request on Facebook out of the blue. I couldn't believe it because we had been basically mortal enemies from the 6th grade until we graduated. About a year after his release, he was having a hard time financially, and I helped him save a significant amount of money on a car repair by referring him to a shop I used for overflow work at the dealership where I was employed. He was very grateful and even tagged me in a post thanking me for helping him avoid a larger repair, so he wouldn't need to miss work. 20 years ago, in high school, that would have never happened. He seems to be doing well, and prison really set him straight. There was a bully I played football with who was an absolute jerk to me and everyone else. He was kicked off the football team during our senior year after he used a racial slur against some people in the student section of a team we had just played. Myself and others were glad to see him go. I found out about 10 years ago that he died from a drug overdose, and I couldn't have cared less. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.